So welcome, voice friends, to another episode of Interviews on Voice Matters. I'm really excited to have Amelia Rawlings here with us today. Thank you so much for being here, Amelia.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Excellent. Just so you know, Amelia is a professor, assistant professor at Western Kentucky University, a voice professor there. And she's also this year's recipient of the Van Lawrence Fellowship from the Voice Foundation for her research on head position and jaw opening. So things that are very detailed that we need to know more about. I'll ask you about that in a second. And then she's also the membership director for the Pan American Vocology Association. So that's another way that I know Amelia. We both serve on the board there together this year, or over this last year. So that's been really wonderful. So thank you again for being here. And the first question I love to ask everyone is, how did you become interested in vocology?
Actually, I began in my musical study in piano. I was not a singer until I went to my undergraduate degree, and for music education, we were required to take voice lessons, and I thought, oh no, I don't want to sing. Why do we have to sing? And then I totally fell in love with it and began singing, and through that coursework, we had to take a voice pedagogy class, and I became interested in that. And then after I graduated, I actually stumbled upon the blog of Jean-Renaud Lafond, who was a New York teacher at that time. He's now in Sweden, but he had a lot about voice science on his website and how it was applicable to voice teaching. And so I love science and love math. And so I just became super interested in voice science. And then went on and got my master's at Penn State. And then finally my PhD in voice pedagogy at the University of Kansas. And I met a wonderful mentor, James Doherty, there. And he was actually a founding member of PAVA, and I became interested in vocology that way. Of course, I've read all of the Ingo Tietze documents, books, about vocology, and I just love the interdisciplinary nature of it, and really excites me.
That's wonderful. Now, one of the questions I like asking usually at the end is like, who should I interview next? And I think I need to get James on an interview. Yeah, I've met him once. He's fascinating and doing such good work. And yeah, that's great to make that connection.
He is, and he's actually retired now. He's living in Georgia, has moved to Kansas, but he was a wonderful mentor in so many ways, and really one of the founding people, in vocology. So definitely, I would advise you to interview him.
Okay, great. So really, one of the biggest reasons I wanted to talk with you is because of a presentation you gave back in 2015 at the Greensboro, the very first PAVA conversation, or conference, I should say. And you gave a presentation on the history of voice teaching and kind of tied that into why we don't have an official certification for voice teaching and whatnot. And it fascinated me so much that I've literally been sitting on this question for 3 years now. So would you be interested in talking a little bit about that presentation and how you got interested in it?
Sure. Yes, we, as part of the PhD program at KU, University of Kansas, we had to do a historical study. And that wasn't really my primary research interest, but it was required to do that, a historical study, a quantitative study, and then you could do a recital or another study, qualitative, and then your dissertation. But Jim Doherty was actually really, really fascinating and a wonderful historical researcher. And so I teamed up with him to really work on this study. I started reading through some of the NATS journals, and the early NATS journals, which are all actually available on the NATS website if you are a member of NATS. And I found that they kept pushing for professional standards, systematic education of voice teachers, and certification. And I thought, well, this is interesting. It was around that time that PAVA was beginning, and I was hearing things about certification. And I thought, wait, have we been trying to do this for the last 65 years? Is that, has this been going on? So I started researching, and I stumbled all the way back to, I actually brought a little picture of it here for you, back to the 1920s. And they had these wonderful articles that said, like, for instance, music teachers seek plan to oust fakers. So I thought, oh my goodness. And these are articles in like the New York Tribune and Washington Post. I mean, just crazy. Detailing how these voice teachers were taking money from students and leaving them with, damaged instruments or a sound that wasn't very good. And so they were really seeking to license or certify voice teachers you know, up the level of voice teaching and protect the public. And so I actually went all the way back even to Manuel Garcia and found that he had his own way of recognizing and certifying voice teachers. He would have these teachers, anyone that wanted his seal of approval, bring before him 5 students before they studied voice, and then after they had worked with the teacher. And if they sang in a style, in a way that showed progress and showed the level of the teacher, he would give them a letter that certified them. And this happened throughout this time, and it was just really amazing historically. So I continue my study by looking at the Nats Journal for about the first 10 years of the Bulletin, which was the primary publication. And what was really interesting is that Nats was really one of the main reasons it was founded was to bring about certification of voice teachers. Richard Young, who was one of the founding members and first presidents of Nats, actually said at a conference that for the Chicago Singing Teachers Guild, that they would have an eventual plan to certify and grant certificates of approval for voice teachers. And he said that all the way back in 1940, before Nats was even founded in 1944. And so I found that really interesting, that was one of the main reasons that for the founding of Nats. And through that, they were also in these early journals talking about issues they were having for voice teachers because there weren't any standards, there wasn't any licensing required, and so there were issues with taxation. Certain voice teachers were being taxed like $20 in order to, you know, maintain their business, especially in their homes. They were being told that they would have to find another place to teach because of zoning laws at that time, that you couldn't teach in your home because it wasn't a business zone. So they were facing that. There was also the institution of the GI Bill of Rights in 1944. And the issue with that was that these veterans would come back and they were being given money to study voice in academic settings, but the private voice teachers could not participate in that. And they felt that was very unfair. In fact, veterans that studied with a private voice teacher before going to war, when they returned, they had to go to an academic voice teacher. They could not return to the private voice teacher and have it paid for through the GI Bill of Rights.
Wow.
So this all began, and there were lots of issues that were kind of pushing these Nats founders to develop some standards, perhaps certification and licensing, just to up the game and create sort of a fairness for everyone, especially as where money was concerned with these veterans and taxation and laws.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the certification still has not happened, correct?
No, what ended up happening, and through this, you know, paper that I worked on, and hopefully it's going to be published within this year, what I realized is that as they kept pushing for these standards, and they did so in a variety of ways, they created different committees. They actually published a document that was called the Basic Fundamental Requirements for Voice Teachers. And interestingly enough, when they published that document, many Nats members did not renew. They didn't pay their dues. And Harvey Ringel, Nat's historian, actually thinks that it might have been because they started saying there were going to be stricter standards educational wise, and were really pushing certification. And so eventually Nats let it go. They instead turned toward education of teachers rather than certification. And my paper argues that that was because they were losing membership, because many of the members did not have degrees. Many of them were private voice teachers. And Richard DeYoung even commented about this, that they weren't able to really press in on those standards and educational requirements because they were losing members. And they had some financial issues during about the 8th to 10th year of the organization.
So you're talking mid-50s, basically?
Yeah, 1952 to 1954, they had some real financial issues during Walter Stoltz's presidency. And he kept pushing, we need members, we need members. And they did always say quality versus quantity, but there was definitely a financial worry at that time. Yes, and they're even in the writings you can read that they said, you know, if we continue being so strict with this, we will continue to have financial problems. So it became a real issue for the organization. And so it's interesting because I call it the pocketbook theme, the financial theme propelled this whole effort. And then eventually it led to the demise of it because they still need members in the organization for it to work. And sometimes you have to choose the bigger picture.
Right. I guess this is why I'm so excited about voice science, because I feel like as we understand more and more about how the voice works from a scientific perspective, facts that we can talk about, that we have more of a standard that we can start to educate people on, and also to potentially certify and test. And I know that that's a huge conversation in the Pan American Vocology Association. So my question is, do you think that we're coming into a time where it's going to be easier to accomplish some kind of certification because of what we know, or is that still a ways off?
I think, and I'm serving right now as the co-chair of the Credentialing Specialization Committee at MPAVA as well. I think, looking back historically, this is why it's so important to look historically. This actually, sidetrack for just a minute, this wasn't the first time they tried to do this either. There was actually a NATS that was founded, the National Association of Teachers of Singing, in 1906. And a man named Herman Klein actually tried to implement certification and testing. And as soon as they did that, the members became furious and withdrew. And that organization eventually became NYSTA, the New York Singing Teachers Association. So it seems like every time they try to implement this, people get angry or upset because, they think maybe they're going to be left out. And so they withdraw, and then the organization faces a crisis, or it just lets go of that and continues with that. So I think at this point, we do have more scientific knowledge, which is great. But I think in order to make this successful in any shape or form, we have to be as inclusive as possible and recognize that voice teachers come from a variety of backgrounds. We have people that start as pianists and then they eventually end up as voice teachers. We have those that come from academia, those who have 30-year amazing performing careers and then become voice teachers and decide to help with that knowledge. So the more that we can be inclusive of those backgrounds and recognize that we're not saying you can't teach, we're just saying let's all have a level of knowledge, a basic level of knowledge that hopefully helps protect our students and the public, and then grow together. I think that's the only way it will actually work.
Exactly. And the idea that each one of us, because of our experience and our unique perspective, is so valuable. I mean, that needs to be a message that's telegraphed everywhere, right? So yeah, thank you for saying that. And that's why your presentation really blew me away, is because understanding the history that all these themes have cycled back. There's so much to learn from them. What do you think the biggest lesson is that we can learn? And you may have already said it, but what are some maybe other big lessons that we can learn from your research?
Well, the biggest thing is history is important. And, before doing a historical study, I always thought that, but I didn't really understand the depth of that thought, that we, instead of repeating history, let's learn what we've, experienced and grow from that. And that's one thing I really, on the committee that I'm on, really, keep reiterating is, let's not reinvent the wheel. They've already tried these things. They've already tried this. We see how it moved toward education at one point. Where can we go from now to be different and actually make this work and implement it? And also taking time. It has to be done slowly, methodically, and correctly, and inclusively. And I think sometimes in the past, the attempts were we've got to get something now. And sometimes that was because they were facing these issues of taxation or legal issues. But the more we can really think through and use as many people and ideas as possible to make this efficient, the better.
Yeah, that's incredibly wise. And that's one of the things that I appreciate about PAVA's movement right now, is that we are taking time and being careful, or at least that's what it seems like from the inside. So I appreciate that perspective very much. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for doing the research and for bringing that into your current job of thinking through this issue, because without that perspective, you're exactly right. We're just going to do the same things over and over again.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
so switching subjects a little bit, what is your most current research about?
Yeah, so I actually, in most of my quantitative studies, my first study was on the effects of high-heeled shoes. So I'm sort of known as the fashion researcher. And actually, someone at University of Kansas just researched the effect of neckties, my friend Evan. And so we're just the fashion school, right? So I began my study with heel height, just knowing as a singer that it's important, and found that heel height had a huge impact on singer head position, which impacted singer jaw opening. I've tested about 275 people now, most of those women, although I just completed my study with men this past spring. But 100% of these people decrease or lower head position as heel height increases. And in research, you just rarely find that. You know, it's half and half or 60-40. And so I was just amazed that all of these singers were lowering head position, which caused a decrease or smaller amount of jaw opening. And that became really important when these singers are singing, especially sopranos, in the high range, and they're trying to formant tune, which we primarily use jaw opening to raise the first formant and formant tune in the higher range. Also becomes an issue for musical theater belters, who, if they're tracking that first formant to the second harmonic, need to do that via jaw opening. So if the heel height is putting them in this downward position, they have to overcompensate in order to do that, or they just don't compensate. So my studies have really investigated this effect of heel height on head position. And with the Van Lawrence Award, I'm going to be working with motion capture to study more the interrelationship between head position and jaw opening as it pertains to vowel and pitch especially.
So motion capture, what is that?
Motion capture, so it's basically adhering little markers to elements of the posture, and then it tracks it on a computer screen so you can measure those really fine-tuned movements. So far, because I am, a poor voice teacher and not in a research, setting, I've been using a method where I put markers on and then I measure them on the screen with a protractor program. It's very accurate, but it's incredibly time consuming. It takes me, like for my dissertation, I measured 15,000 measurements by hand. So it takes about 5 to 6 hours per participant. And when you've got 40 participants, you can do the math. So it's very time consuming. So using motion capture will not only be able to give me more dynamic adjustments and show me, what happens in between those movements, but also save so much time. So I'm excited.
Where are you going to be doing that?
Right now I'm researching. I did talk with Steve Austin at University of North Texas, and I know he has access to it. But one wonderful thing about the Van Lawrence Award is that it puts you in contact with these leading researchers who have equipment. And as a voice teacher, we don't often have access to that equipment. So I'm very excited.
That is wonderful. I hope to interview you soon after you've done some more research.
Yeah.
So have you has anybody measured the acoustic effects of the heels, or is it, yeah?
Yes, so I measure acoustically primarily through long-term average spectra, which measures the entire sung example. So if they sing a whole song, I measure it between, flats, heels, medium heels, high heels, depending on what the study is. I've done 9 studies in heel height now. But what I found is that it sometimes dampens that sound as the head position is turning down, because it changes it acoustically as far as formats go.
Okay.
So it's really interesting.
So 2 questions. One, how did you become interested in this heel height question?
Well, when I first went to KU, I was trying to come up with something. You have to do a diagnostic study, which is your first research study, your first semester, which determines whether you get into the program for real or not. And so I was trying to come up with something, and I kept, of course, being a voice teacher, I was biting off way too much than I could chew, wanting to study registration right off the bat, but I was riding in the car with my friend, Katie Hom is her name. And I said, well, why don't we just test the effect of shoes, singers and shoes? And she said, Amelia, that is a good idea. And I said, really? So I took the idea to Jim Doherty, and he said, I don't really think anyone would be interested in that. He's a man,
Right.
he's a man. And I said, no, really? I said, it's a thing. He said, just like a good researcher, he said, if you go and find me some anecdotal, opinion things online that talk about it, we'll try it. And he said, and go do a review of literature and find every study you can find in heel height. And so that's what I did. I came back with so many online resources from voice teachers that say, don't wear these shoes or wear these shoes. And then I found upwards of like 250 articles, research articles in heel height and its effect on the body. And then through that, I found studies in sleep apnea and orthodontics that talk about the effect of head position on the vocal tract and all of these things. Yes, it's amazing. People with sleep apnea tend to sleep with an upper raised head position because it makes larger the pharyngeal cavity. So then they can actually breathe more efficiently.
Really?
Yeah, that's one of the things. And so they've done a lot of research on that in kids with enlarged tonsils. Same thing. It's much harder for them to breathe if their heads are down. So they normally go like that. And so I found all of this research, and he said, absolutely do it, and has totally supported me in it. And I'm really excited about it because I think it's one of those things that tests practical things we use every day in the voice studio. And so now teachers can say what to wear and what not to wear.
Well, that's what I was going to say. How has it affected your teaching practice? Like, what would you say for all the voice teachers who are going to watch this interview? What do we do?
Well, I get asked this question a lot. The first thing is understanding that as much as I would love for females to wear flats, just because there are so many studies on the detrimental effects of heels on the body. I mean, just so many studies on your feet, on your bones, your joints, everything. You use more oxygen when you're wearing high heels. I mean, it's just crazy, the effects. So as much as I would love that, I do understand that there are some expectations of professional dress in audition situations. And so I really advise my own singers to wear as small of a heel as possible, but also a wide base so that you are distributing your mean center of gravity more equally instead of a stiletto. A character shoe is actually a great functional sort of shoe to wear. They're not the prettiest thing. So I tell my students, look for shoes that are like character shoes, have a wide base, are very stable with the way your foot is strapped into the shoe so that you're not feeling like it's going to come out, a wide toe box. I say look for shoes like that. And they're able to find, some different types of shoes that work. There is still the question of whether practicing in the shoes helps. And many voice teachers will say it does, practice in your shoes, practice in your shoes. It helps you, I guess, sort of figure out what kind of compensation you're going to have to use with those shoes. But I'm still actually going to test that. It's one of my next things that I'm going to be looking at is what is the learning? How does someone learn with high heels?
Wow.
So
yeah, this is super nuanced stuff that singers probably are not thinking about so much while they're singing because we're talking about just very small adjustments in the vocal tract, right?
Mm-hmm. Very small, but in the vocal tract, everything is very small. So I've seen singers change as much as 10 degrees in head position, 10 degrees between barefoot and 3-inch heels.
Really?
So, yes.
So I have a question. Because you've done all these measurements, you've seen all this stuff on the screen, you've spent hours and hours looking at this, can you see it in the studio? Like I don't think I could see it because I haven't looked for it before, but are you able to see all these micro adjustments that people are making?
I can if I were to have them stand flat and then stand on. I actually built these heel height simulators.
That's great.
With an engineer because heels actually, the height changes based on what size shoe you wear. If you wear a size 10 or up, the heels will be about a half an inch higher. If you wear sizes 5 or below, they're half an inch lower. So for control purposes, I had to build heel height simulators. So if I have a student stand on them, I can definitely tell the difference. But even more than that, I can tell the difference when they're looking at a music stand, when they're looking at a choir folder. The difference is that head position creates. When I'm sitting at the piano and they're standing up looking down at me, it automatically, head position is a huge thing because it puts them in different configurations based on focal point, based on what they're looking at, all these things. So it's something really to consider just on the whole.
That is fascinating. This is really blowing my mind. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
It blew my mind when I did it. All of this was new to me, but that's why research is so fun and so cool.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm like, this is so neat. There's a reason we like science. It's just fascinating.
Yeah,
so, in light of the research that you've done so far, what do you see for the field of vocology? I know that's a very broad question, but, where do you see us going?
Yeah, I think, I've asked myself this question a lot as a board member for PAVA and on the credentialing committee. I think we need to continue to define what vocology is. Mm-hmm. I think, and put that definition out there. I mean, the current definition is the science and art of vocal habilitation, but I think it's more than that. I really think the biggest part of vocology is the interdisciplinary study of it. Mm. So for me, our own professions are the genus like voice. It's a voice pedagogue that specializes and is a vocalogist. It's a speech language pathologist that specializes and is a vocalogist. Because what we have to be sure about doing is really defining our scope of practice. Mm-hmm. Because just being a vocalogist does not make one a voice teacher. It doesn't make one a speech language pathologist. It doesn't make one a laryngologist. Mm. The vocalogist is really, once you have your own profession, really looking into the interdisciplinary nature and how those other professions inform your profession and knowledge. And so I think the more we can define vocology and put out there, what does a vocalogist do? What does if we're able to implement some form of recognition certification, what does that enable you to do? Because that's really what we want to know. So I think that's really important.
Yeah.
I also think it's really important that we continue to advertise to the public why it matters, and that this, especially with voice teaching, laryngology, speech language pathology, they already know this, but with voice teaching, that it is a public health concern. Thomas Rogalski actually said that societies normally credential or license those occupations where practitioner's incompetence could hurt someone. And in voice, there's still the belief that we're just singing. It's just singing. But we all know that you can hurt someone.
Yeah.
And so hopefully as we try to move towards recognition and certification, we understand that that doesn't mean someone's a good voice teacher or a good, just as, a doctor, if someone is a licensed doctor, that doesn't mean they're a good doctor. It just means they have a base level of knowledge that hopefully means they won't hurt someone, at least not consciously,
Yeah.
And it raises the whole field and standard of the field. So, yeah.
Those are really good points. And I'm going to spend some time going back over this interview and transcribing some of what you said, because you're making some wonderful points that need to just be telegraphed a little bit more. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah. And I also wanted to say too, I hope that we really examine teacher education. How do voice teachers learn what to do? One of the best things about the University of Kansas program that I loved so much was that they focused on performance, teaching, and research, all three, the PhD. Wow. We were required to perform. We were required to audition for things, operas. You did have to do a singing audition to get into the program. Mm-hmm. We also had to go do supervised teaching, mentored teaching, all of these things, and the research. And I think really that's looking, and the science behind that, but really looking at the comprehensive education of a voice teacher and how our doctoral studies support that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And someday I'm excited about it that does that for people who do other types of singing besides classical.
Absolutely. And I will say, I'm teaching musical theater right now. I made sure one great thing about the KU program is it allowed you to kind of build your own program. And so I focused on musical theater and CCM, voice teaching, because I think really everyone needs to at least have a workable knowledge of how to work with someone that wants to do that. Yes, there will be those that specialize in opera or musical theater or, you know, any of these things, but you're teaching the voice. The voice, we don't have one larynx for opera and one larynx for, that's not how it works.
Right.
So it's important. It's definitely important.
Yeah, I mean, I saw an Aretha Franklin tribute Sunday night, and 4 session singers from Nashville, soul singers, and each one of them as good or better than the one before them. And it was absolutely stunning. And these women are athletes of the highest order, and they're working all the time. And you know what I mean? It's just, the voice can do so much. And to be able to help people through that process, even if they can do it to habilitate them or whatever, I just think that's such a worthy, anyway, it's what I like. I'll just say that. So
Absolutely.
yeah, it's amazing what we've got. So, well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I know a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this interview. So in the future, would you be willing to come back and do another interview as your research progresses and there's more to talk about?
Absolutely. I would love to. That sounds amazing.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.